As part of the Hoopa event, Malamar is now in Pokemon Go. And this unique, tricky Pokemon here has a lot of people wondering just how good is it in the Pokemon Go PvP metas. Well, in this video, I'm going to let you know just how good Malamar is in PvP in Pokemon Go. As for the Malamar Basics, Malamar is a Dark Psychic type Pokemon, which is a pretty unique typing. I actually talk about it a bit in my Hoopa video, link up above and in the description if you want to know about both forms of Hoopa, but the Daddy Hoopa form also has this unique typing. And with the Psychic and Dark typing, the Psychic type kind of covers the Fighting type weakness of the Dark type, and then the Dark type covers Psychic's Dark and Ghost type weaknesses. So it's a pretty synergistic type that I guess leaves you vulnerable to Bug type attacks. You're doubly weak to Bug type attacks. Those don't really exist in the meta all that much, so not a big concern there. And you are still weak to Fairy type attacks, but I don't think anybody would really fault a Dark type Pokemon for being weak to Fairy type attacks. This unique typing also gives you a triple resistance to Psychic, because Dark doubly resists Psychic, and then Psychic has a single resistance to Psychic, so Hypno has nothing really to do against Malamar here. When it comes to Malamar's stats in the Great League, its stat product is in the 1800 to 1900 range, which is pretty solid. It's not a tanky Pokemon, it's not a glassy Pokemon, it's just a solid Pokemon with very, very few weaknesses. That said, Malamar does have a little bit of a detriment there too, in that it has very few resistances outside of that Psychic typing, so even though it is that middle of the road type Pokemon, more often than not it is going to feel a little bit more on the glassy side because it doesn't have a whole lot of matchups to use resistances in. Then when it comes to Malamar's move pool, we have Psycho Cut and Peck for the fast moves, so the only fast move you're using is Psycho Cut. Then for the charge moves, we have Foul Play, Super Power, Psybeam, and Hyper Beam to work with. So the Foul Play and the Super Power are probably going to be the bread and butter type moves for Malamar here. Psybeam does give it some interesting Psychic type coverage, but it is overall a really poor move. And Hyper Beam, I guess you could meme on some opponents with the beam there, but overall probably isn't the best move for Malamar. It's probably going to be best to stick with the Super Power and the Foul Play, so you got that nice, dark fighting type coverage to threaten things with. Now when it comes to the Great League meta here, I feel like Malamar is kind of the inferior Dark type compared to its Dark type brethren here. One big reason why it's pretty inferior is that it has nothing to do against Azumarill whatsoever. Like Mandibuzz has Aerial Ace, Sableye has Return, or I guess if it's not the Purified Sableye, you could hit it with the Power Gem. Umbreon has, Last Resort and Psychic. You got Obstagoon with Gunk Shot. The only real meta Dark type Pokemon that also shares that trait is going to be Scrafty. And because of Scrafty's typing and its moveset, Scrafty really isn't used as a Pokemon that can tackle multiple type of threats. It's like this big dominating type Pokemon that's indomitable against certain matchups. So you just kind of throw in Scrafty and let it do work. Scrafty isn't really a safe swap. Scrafty shouldn't be fighting Azumarill. So it is kind of like a little, apples to oranges there to talk about Scrafty and Malamar, because Malamar really isn't a big dominating Pokemon like Scrafty can be. It is that more in-between safe swap type of option, and if your safe swap can't really manage Azumarill, that's not a very good look. To add to this, it also doesn't really have anything to do against opposing Dark type Pokemon. I mean, it does have a consistent-ish Obstagoon matchup, because Obstagoon is doubly weak to the fighting type attacks, but to most fighting type Pokemon, even if you land the superpower, you're not really flipping those matchups just because your superpower is pretty soft coming off your stats there. And then after you throw the superpower, whether you land it or not, it's still going to debuff your attack and your defense by one stage, making all of your other hits even softer, and it's going to make damage coming into you that much harder. So Malamar has it pretty rough when it comes to fighting opposing Dark type Pokemon. The problem with Superpower also extends to a lot of its Steel and Normal type matchups, where whether you land the Superpower or not, you're still debuffing yourself. It's still not doing quite enough damage. So unless you get like the perfect PV poke kind of bait into Superpower situation going on, generally it's not working out too hot for Malamar. So that is a bit of a problem. Compared to like Obstagoon or Scrafty, where their fighting type coverage is more front loaded. they're using counter. They are always using their fighting type damage. They don't really have to worry about when they're throwing their fighting type damage, if their fighting type damage is actually going to land or not, and any potential debuffs, detriments that come with their fighting type damage, because it doesn't debuff them, right? So yeah, so Malamar definitely has its issues laid out for it here. That said, I wouldn't say Malamar is necessarily a bad Pokemon in the meta here. It's just more of an interesting spice pick. One neat little advantage that Malamar has over opposing Dark-type Pokemon is that it can flip the Bastiodon matchup. It can flip opposing counter user matchups, like think about Medicham, Toxicroak, Deoxys Defense Form, and then it also has a fairly consistent Cresselia matchup as well. And many other Dark-type Pokemon can do some of those jobs fairly well, but Malamar can do all three of them fairly consistently, so I think that's a pretty good a pretty good look for Malamar there. That said, its ability to get countered like absolutely and entirely by opposing Dark-type Pokemon in a meta that is almost completely saturated with Dark-type Pokemon, definitely not great for Malamar. So Malamar, more of a spice pick, definitely not a top meta threat. You could consider building one for the Open Great League, but I don't think it would necessarily be worth it. If Malamar ever were to find a limited format where most Dark-type Pokemon are banned, like maybe only like Psychic, Normal, and then whatever types of Pokemon are allowed in that meta, and it basically results in Malamar and Obstagoon effectively being the only Dark types, or maybe like Malamar, Obstagoon, and Sableye being the only Dark types, then I could see Malamar getting a lot of utility then and being a pretty solid meta threat in that type of environment. But when it comes to the Open Great League meta or any sort of Great League meta where most Dark types are allowed, Malamar is probably going to be taking the backseat to those other Dark type Pokemon. Now when it comes to the Ultra League, Malamar is still pretty mediocre there too, for a lot of the same reasons it's mediocre in the Great League. To add to that, Malamar is a level 50 XL Pokemon in the Ultra League as well, so it is super expensive to build. To end up with a relatively mediocre Pokemon, I think you'd much rather, build an Obstagoon, a Scrafty, or an Umbreon for the Ultra League. And then when it comes to limited Ultra League formats, once again, those are kind of like super expensive memes. Usually Giratina is banned, and Giratina is one of the main matchups that you're going to want to use a Malamar for. So it's just like, I don't know, limited Ultra League metas already kind of rub me the wrong way when it's not like the Premier Cup, and I just don't think Malamar is exactly worth your time and effort to build for the Ultra League. And then if you're curious about Malamar in Gym Defense or Raids, in Gym Defense, I guess it's not exactly bad, but it's not exactly good. It's not really doing anything against Machamp. It is, fighting neutral, so the Machamp squads are going to burn right through it. And when it comes to Raids, it's not nearly strong enough to do anything in Raids. So that's about all I gotta say on Malamar here. Not a terrible Pokemon, but definitely more of a weird spice pick, right? If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content and you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. One thing I really like about Malamar is that they did give it superpower. In the main series games, it had this ability that kind of flipped buffs and debuffs, so superpower was a move that Malamar would want to use most of the time to kind of ramp itself up. It doesn't have that same type of swag here in Pokemon Go. Its debuffs do stay as debuffs, but I do like that little attention to detail there, because they could have easily not given it superpower, and then it really wouldn't feel like Malamar. And with superpower, this Malamar definitely feels like it is Malamar.